Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my August wrap up. So as I am kicking off this video, it is Friday the 9th of August. I have read 4 books so far this month, DNF'd 1, but the books that I have read so far have all been absolutely brilliant. So let me talk about them in the order that I read them. First is my most anticipated release of 2024, and this is Private Rites by Julia Armfield. I really love this book. I didn't like it quite as much as Our Wives Under the Sea. Side note, every time I mention Our Wives Under the Sea or hear anyone else talk about it, I just think of the Little Mermaid song. Does that happen to anyone else? It's a great song. So yeah, not quite as much, I didn't like it quite as much as Our Wives Under the Sea, but I really, really loved it. This for me was a little bit of a slow burn. It took me a bit to get into it. But it was the kind of book that sort of slowly creeps under your skin into your brain. And by the end of the book, I was just absolutely captivated by it, and I closed the book and I was like, wow, that was an amazing book. So what's it about? We follow 3 sisters who were all sort of somewhat estranged from each other, and their father has passed away, and so they then have to reconnect to sort of deal with their father's affairs. The book is told separately. We see sort of from each of the sisters' point of view, and we also have a narrative viewpoint from what is called the city, where we get sort of not quite an omniscient narrator, but sort of like a one step removed narrative viewpoint as well. The backdrop to the book is that the world is like slowly drowning. So people live on like the top floors of apartment blocks. Society is completely different in terms of the actual physicality of how people are able to live and travel around and stuff because of all the water. But actually society itself hasn't changed that much, because people still have to go to work. They're carrying on with their everyday life, even though like doomsday is arriving basically. I love Julia Armfield's writing. I just find it so mesmerising. There's just something about it that I really love. The book is very queer as well, obviously, which I also loved. And yeah, this is a book that I think demands a reread. And it was just really, really wonderful. I absolutely loved it. Sort of, as I say, a bit of a slow burn. For me, it took a little bit to get into it. But once I was into it, I was just completely captivated by it and by Julia Armfield's writing. So that was wonderful. Next is sort of a random library pick, and this is Cecilia by Chang. I think this is quite recently published. I just saw it on the library website and thought it sounded interesting. It's very short and it is quite bizarre. This is queer as well, and it's a story of obsession. So our main character is called Seven. She works as a cleaner, and one day she's like in her 20s, and one day when she's on the bus she encounters this woman called Cecilia, who she knew when she was younger, when she was a child, and she was quite obsessed with Cecilia. And so as we go through the book, we get her memories of Cecilia and of their relationship, the relationship between the two of them. It's very intense, quite surreal, kind of fever dreamy. There is a lot of description of bodily functions, and at points it was, I thought, quite a lot. Like, there were parts of the book where I was like, what am I reading? But also, I can't stop reading. So I really liked it, but also I I'm not quite sure what to think of it. This is the kind of book that is definitely not going to be for everyone. Some of the reviews on Storygraph are quite amusing. I've seen a couple of people compare it to Paradise Rot by Genevieve, which I did read a couple of months ago. I didn't do a review because it was when I was taking a break from BookTube, and I didn't love that book, but I can see the comparison between that and this one. So if you like sort of fever dreamy, obsessive stuff, and you don't mind talk of bodily functions, then give it a go. Next is my DNF, and it's the book that I was reading for my library book club. We're going to be meeting tomorrow morning, and it's All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I made it to page like 200. It's about, how long is this? 500 odd pages. This is a book that I've never been drawn to read. It's a super popular book, obviously, but it's just never been something I was interested in picking up myself. Obviously, I wanted to give it a go for the book club. I'm not really into war novels, and yeah, it's just not something I'm drawn to. But I will say I was getting on with this much better than I was expecting to. It reads really quickly, which I was surprised about because it is a pretty long book, but the chapters are like 3 pages long each. So it does read really quite quickly. We get 2 viewpoints. I can't remember people's names. Mary Law, who lives in Paris with her father, and Werner, who is a German orphan, and he is becoming indoctrinated into the Hitler Youth. And so we have like, it flips between, the chapters flip between their sort of stories. So it was okay. It was fine. But the reason why I DNF'd it was because I was reading it last weekend. I read about 200 pages in a day. As I say, it was a quick read. But it was the time when all the riots were kicking off in the UK. And I just felt like I didn't want to read about Nazis when there was like fascist riots on the street. I felt like I needed some escapism in my reading. So that was the reason why I DNF'd it. I mean, had I finished it, there's redacted stuff, which is quite interesting. But anyway, had I finished it, it probably would have been like a 2-star. So yeah, well, that was why I DNF'd it. There was a reason. And then, in search of some escapism, I picked up Bored Gay Werewolf by Tony Santorella, and I loved this book. This was just delightful from start to finish. I had so much fun reading this. I really, really did. This was wonderful, and I'm absolutely going to read what this author publishes next. So this book is about Brian, who works in a cafe. He has a fairly sort of mundane day-to-day life. He's friends with his co-workers, and he's also a werewolf. So when it's a full moon, he becomes a werewolf, and he has the urge to sort of go out, and he goes to the parks, and he has the urge to kill people and animals. But Brian is a nice guy, and Brian doesn't want to go around killing people, so he tries to suppress these urges, and obviously he keeps this a secret from everyone he knows, understandably. And yeah, so he then meets early on this guy called Tyler, who comes into the cafe one day, who is also a werewolf, and Tyler is setting up this sort of like social media based company called The Pack TM, and he wants to sort of create a bit of a wellness brand for werewolves and like a support group and different things like that. And I thought it was very funny in terms of its commentary on like that sort of online organisation. This book is silly, but it's not stupid, and it does make some really sort of important points through kind of this silly lens of Brian being a werewolf. It's very queer. It's a very queer book, and there is an analogy there between sort of queerness and otherness and secrets and being a werewolf. But I just had the best time with this. This was just so much fun from start to finish. I love Brian as a character. I thought he was great. Side characters were great as well. I just had so much fun with this book. It was honestly such a great read. Then something quite different. I read Breakdown by Cathy Sweeney. So this is quite a short book, and it's about a woman whose name I don't think we find out. Who has a husband, she has children, and she lives in Dublin. And one day she just sort of had enough of her life, and she leaves. And she just like leaves the house, goes on this trip, gets the bus, gets the ferry over to Wales. I think it was Wales. Yeah, Wales. And it's the book sort of focuses mainly on the journey between her home to this cottage she ends up living in Wales. And we find out more about her backstory. She is not an entirely likeable character, and I think this is the kind of book that will probably annoy and frustrate some readers, because it's, you know, it's very introspective, just about this one woman who herself is not, you know, she's not massively unlikable, but, you know, she's maybe done some questionable things, and there's sort of a knowingness to her as a character as well, in that she understands that the life that she has and has been living is, to an outside view, perfectly pleasant, fine. You know, she's doesn't want for anything, and, you know, it's not an awful marriage or anything like that, but she just decides she's had enough. So I liked it. The writing is pretty sparse. It's sort of, this reads really quickly. There's quite a lot of like white space on the page in terms of like how stuff is written. And yeah, I really enjoyed that a lot. It is a bit bleak, like, as it sounds. It's not like depressing as such, but it's generally a little bit bleak, understandably, because of like what it's about. But I enjoyed that. So yeah, so the month has got off to a good start. I need to take some of those books back to the library tomorrow. I've got books out of 3 libraries at the moment, so I need to make sure to put them in the correct piles and not take books back to the libraries that they don't belong to. But yeah, I think I've got 2 books waiting for me at the library. One's a book. I can't think what the other one is. But yeah, I've still got like, I've got a lot of library books out at the moment. So yeah, I need to get some more reading done this weekend. I've started, oh, it's over there in my work bag, started reading Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay, which is really good so far. It took me a bit to get into it, but now I'm like hooked. So I'll probably finish that tomorrow afternoon. I'll update you when I have finished it, and when I've read some more stuff. It's about a week later. I have read 2 more books and DNF'd 2 more books. So we'll go through the books that I have read first, and I enjoyed both of these a lot. First is Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. So Paul Tremblay is a horror author who I have had somewhat of a mixed relationship with. I've read 4 of his books now. My favourite was The Cabin at the End of the World. I thought that was incredible. I read A Head Full of Ghosts several years ago, and I enjoyed that. I didn't get on with the Pallbearers Club. However, I can admire what he was doing with that book. Horror Movie is probably my second favourite of the ones of his that I've read so far. What I particularly like about this book is the narrative layers that we have, and how they sort of build the intrigue and different sort of types of horror to tell the story. So this is based around a horror movie, as you can imagine, which this sort of small group of young people were filming in 1993, I think. 1993. So they were spending a few weeks making a horror movie called Horror Movie, a notorious disturbing art house horror film. So only a few of those scenes when they made that movie were released to the public because something sort of terrible happened, and the film was never sort of properly finished and released. So so that happened in 1993, and then in the present day we have our main character, who played a character called the Thin Kid in the Horror Movie, and he is the only one of the cast who is still around. And in the present day they are filming a reboot of this movie, and they've asked him to be involved. So we have sort of three different narrative strands going on. We have one in 1993 where we are following these young people making the movie. The boy who is playing the Thin Kid is brought in, and he has been told to only read his part of the script the day before he's going to film whatever scene it is. So he's sort of being kept a little bit in the dark in terms of the whole plot of the movie, where things are going to go. A part of it revolves around him sort of wearing this certain mask. There is quite a lot of sort of tension built up in that part of the story, and there is some quite disturbing stuff. We also have excerpts from the script, from the movie script, and there is some disturbing stuff in that for sure. What I thought was interesting about the script parts was because in a script obviously there is the instructions to the actors, and those instructions are written in sort of a fairly matter-of-fact way, and that somehow makes the horror being told within that script even more horrific, because it's sort of being told in such a matter-of-fact way. And then the third narrative sort of strand that we get is the present day, when this film is being remade. So as I say, I do think this is pretty disturbing. I was aware of that going into it, and it's probably sort of on the limits of what I personally can read in terms of disturbing stuff. And I really liked the voice of the main character and the mix of different sort of types of horror that are in the story. So I really enjoyed that. Then I picked up Death and the Conjuror by Tom Mead. So this is the first book in a murder mystery series. The third book has recently been published, and that prompted me to remind myself that why have I not read this series before, because these are murder mysteries but they all feature locked room mysteries, which is basically like my favourite thing ever. I love a locked room mystery. So I got the first one out of the library. So this is set in 1936 in London, and it follows the death of a psychiatrist who has been found killed in his locked study. So the door is locked, the windows are locked. We find out some stuff about the different patients he was seeing, who in his notes refer to as patients A, B and C, and so the police are trying to find out who those people are, and then the different sort of relationships that they have with this guy. We also find out about different family members. There's lots of suspects. Obviously that is a locked room mystery. We also have a theft of a painting, again in sort of a locked room circumstance, and then there is another death that occurs in another sort of similar locked room type environment. So there's a few sort of impossible puzzles in there. The police get the help of this sort of famous magician. What's his name? Joseph Spector, magician turned sleuth, Joseph Spector, and obviously because of his background as a magician, he sort of is very well versed in seemingly impossible puzzles, and how they may be solved. I thought he was a great character. He was definitely giving me Jonathan Creek vibes, which I enjoyed. I raced through this. I read it in like just over a day, I think. I thought it was excellent. If you're a fan of Golden Age crime fiction, I think you'd really like this. It made reference to Golden Age crime fiction at certain points as well. There was one part which references the work of John Dixon Carr and his sort of thoughts on locked room mysteries from one of his most famous books, The Hollow Man. I really enjoyed that because I love John Dixon Carr's books. At the end, when, obviously I'm not going to give any spoilers, but when we get the solution, it gives you like little footnotes where it'll tell you like what page different clues were on, so you can flick back and see where the different clues were. And one minor criticism is that I mean I did not guess the solution, and I never do really guess the solution, particularly in like locked room mystery type things, because they can be sometimes somewhat convoluted. I don't mind that at all. But there were certain things as I was reading the book that I thought, like, that must be a clue, because why is the author mentioning this? And it was like there could have been like a flashing red arrow pointed at certain things that were being described, shall we say. Now, I didn't work out how everything fit together, of course I didn't. But yeah, I thought some of that was a little bit clunky, because I think, you know, there are some authors, probably like, you know, Agatha Christie, for example, who will, you know, put the clues in there and it's not obvious that they are clues. In some cases I thought it was obvious what the clues were, even though I didn't put them all together. But nevertheless, I really, really enjoyed this book. I thought it was excellent, and I'm really looking forward to reading the second and third in the series. Now, my 2 DNFs of the week. And the first DNF I kind of don't want to talk about, because I feel like if I'm going to get chucked off BookTube for anything, it will be this DNF. And let me just say, first of all, that I'm sorry. And I do not think this is a bad book, it just wasn't for me. And it's James by Percival Everett. So I made it to page, I think, 130. So, if you don't know, this was published this year. It's been a really popular book and it's on the Booker long list. It's probably one of the front runners to win the Booker Prize this year. And it is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, from the perspective of Jim, the slave in this book, James. I haven't read Huckleberry Finn. I don't think you necessarily need to read this, but I imagine you probably would get more out of it if you have read that. I say that having not finished this book. The reason I DNF'd it was just because I was finding it a bit of a slog. I was finding it quite dull. There are things about it that I do think are really great. So in particular, what it says about language. So in the book, James uses language and his use of language to maintain some sort of control over white people. So he will purposefully and will teach like his children to speak in certain ways around white people, so they continue to believe them to be sort of less educated, less intelligent, those sorts of things, because that maintains whilst clearly not a good relationship, a livable relationship. Whereas if James were to talk to white people in the way that he would talk to like other members of his family, the white people would be offended at the sort of level of intelligence that James would show through his language. So I thought that aspect of it was really interesting, but ultimately I did find it a bit dull. I found the plot it just kind of bored me. So yeah, most people love this book clearly, so just ignore what I think, that's fine. My other DNF was Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. I read just under half of this book and I was quite enjoying it. This is about a woman who is married, her husband is not really much help, she has a young child, and it's really a commentary on motherhood and in particular society's expectations of women as mothers. I thought it was a really interesting critique. The reason I DNF'd it was because there was some violence. Well, it was the character. I haven't told you really what this is about. Let me go back a step. So there's this woman. Anyway, she starts to feel these changes happening to her body, like patches of hair growing on the side of her neck, and as if she's like growing a tail and things. And she's turning into a dog. She's turned into a feral dog. So I did like the sort of surreal aspect of it. But yeah, the reason I DNF'd it was because there was it was an imagined depiction of violence against an animal from the main character when she's a dog. And so of course it makes sense that if she's turned into a feral dog that she's going to want to eat other animals, like of course she's going to. So maybe I should have knew that was going to happen, but it was just like, it was a bit much, it was quite a lot. And then I had a look at reviews on Storygraph, and like the top one that came up talked about violence towards animals, and it's just something that I couldn't stomach, like the level of it in here. So that's why I DNF'd that one. So those are the things I've read or DNF'd this week. I'll mention a poetry book that I've started reading. I know, Who Do I Think I Am? This is He, She, They, Us, queer poems, and it's like edited by Charlie Castelleti. This is, I think, fairly recently published. I've seen this in like the bookshop. So the cover, and because this is a library copy, I can't show you the other side. So the underside, it has like a he and a she in different colours, so you can sort of flip it however you like. And so like the blurb on the front thing, so you can see it there, and even if you flip it that way, you can see it there as well. I know, I just thought that was cool. So yeah, this is a poetry collection. I don't read poetry. I haven't read poetry really since school, when I didn't enjoy it at all. But I was interested in this obviously because it's queer. Now, what I didn't realise until I got out of the library was this is actually a anthology of not just contemporary poets, but like older sort of classic poets as well. It's the collection is laid out in sort of sections. So the sections that we get are moments, scenes, we are strong, queer joy, identity, how to be you, advice, those who made us, and who are we now and where will we be. So we've got poets in here include Sappho, Caroline Duffy, Travis Alabanza, Ocean Vuong, Wilfred Owen, Oscar Wilde, Radcliffe Hall, Dean Atta, Kay Tempest, and Kai Miller, Rupert Brooke. So, and lots of poets who I've not heard of, who are probably really famous, but I am quite ignorant when it comes to poetry and poets, really. But anyway, so I've only read like the first 20 pages or so, but I'm just going to make my way through this slowly, because if I'm going to like any poetry, it's probably going to be something like this. My library has this under teenage reading, and I hadn't realised it was aimed at a teenage audience. I don't know if it is or not. I do think my library sometimes puts stuff under teenage reading when it's not really, because I mean, so far it doesn't seem like it's particularly teenage aimed. But anyway, so this is going well so far. And then the book that I've started reading, I only started it last night, is The Last Passenger by Will Dean. I'm page 66. So I've DNF'd a Will Dean book before, but I wanted to read this one because I've heard there's a twist, and if you tell me a book has a twist, I'm going to want to read it. Someone I'm in my book group with at the library read this for another book group she's in and mentioned it. I don't think she liked it. I don't think she finished it. I think she skipped to see what the twist was. But I borrowed this when she took it back to the library. So far, it's not great, I'll be honest, but I'm still reading it because I want to know what this twist is. It's quite a big, heavy book, but the writing's massive, and it's like a pacey read, so we'll see how far I get. I mean, if I do DNF it, then I'll just skip to see all the twisters, obviously. But I will update you probably in about a week's time when I've hopefully finished that and hopefully read some more of these other library books. Hello, it's a week later, and I did in the end DNF The Last Passenger by Will Dean. So I made it to the big twist, which happens partway through the book. My reaction on reading the twist, I'm not going to say what it is, but my reaction when I got to that was that I laughed out loud. I'm not sure if that was the intention. The plot of this book is something which I could have really enjoyed. The reason I DNF'd it was because I think it's just a really poorly written book, and I think this is what I thought about the previous Will Dean that I DNF'd, that I just thought it was a bad book. And yeah, you know, sometimes you read a book and you're surprised that the author is published and is popular. That's how I feel about Will Dean. I just think his writing, it's just kind of boring, and this should not have been a boring book. So I did DNF it, but I got to the twist, well, the first twist, and then I skipped to the end to see sort of, yeah, what was going to happen. But there. I have had another DNF this week, which I'll mention now, and that is My Friends by Hisham Matar. This is on the book along list. I don't think I've mentioned yet, but my sort of general book of reading plan was to just pick up whichever ones I could get my hands on from the library. So I am, or have been, in queues for several of the books. I didn't get very far into this, maybe like 30-ish pages before I DNF'd, and that really was just because I came to the realisation that I'm not in the mood for book of reading at the moment. I'm just not in the mood for it. I think I need stuff that is more plotty and more page turnery right now. So I did DNF this one after having declared that I was giving up on book of this year. I then saw that my hold for Orbital has come into the library, so I will give that one a go, Orbital by Samantha Harvey, and that was one that I was interested in before it was longlisted for the book. That's waiting for me to pick up this morning. So I will give that one a go. Oh, and actually there is one exception to book of reading. I've got There and Wandering Stars out from the library by Tommy Orange, and I am going to give those a go. There was published a few years ago. The one that's longlisted is Wandering Stars, which is a prequel sequel. But anyway, that's Booker. And then I did read two other books. So I read Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake, and I absolutely love this book. This is the first book in a series. I actually started off reading the third book in a series, which I really, really loved. And the series is about this sort of group of friends, and each book centres a different character. So in this one, Delilah Green works as a photographer, and she lives in New York, and she ends up getting roped into being the photographer for her stepsister's wedding. So she goes back to the sort of small town where she's from, and there's a romance that blossoms. I love this series. It's a queer rom-com, so much fun. Not sort of tonally, not the sort of thing I usually read. I don't read a lot of light-hearted stuff, I would say, but I think this series is really, really excellent, so I'm looking forward to reading the second one in the series next. And I also read The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson. This is a cosmic horror novel, first published in 1908, was it? 1908. And this was an interesting read. This is a book whereby I'm pleased I read it. It was interesting to read because of the context of what it is, being, I think, an early example of cosmic horror, who allegedly the author influenced writers including H.P. Lovecraft and Terry Pratchett. So it was interesting to read in terms of the context of what it was, and I don't think I've read any cosmic horror before. However, overall, I wouldn't say I overly enjoyed the book because there was sort of a section in the middle that just really dragged for me, but it was still an interesting read. So we start off with these two men or boys who discover this manuscript, and then the bulk of the novel is this manuscript, which was written by this old man who lives in this big old house with his sister and a servant, and weird stuff starts happening. I liked the mix of horror in the book, so we get like creature monster type horror and also sort of shifting of reality and time and space type horror. So yeah, I thought it was doing some interesting things, even though it kind of dragged in part for me. But I am interested. This is part of the British Library Tales of the Weird series, and this I think is the first one that I've read from that series, but I always sort of have a look at these in the bookshop and think they look quite interesting, so I am interested in reading more from this series because I do quite like weird stuff. So as I say, I'm going to go to the library this morning. I need to take some of these back. I've got 3 books waiting for me. Orbital, a book I'm reading from our work book club, which is called something like The Persian Boy, and I've got the new Yoko Ogawa book waiting for me, which is very exciting. And I still have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 9, 10 other library books already, not counting the ones I'm going to be picking up today. So yeah, it is a bank holiday weekend, which is a good job because I need to read some of these library books. We have another week left in August, so hopefully I'll get some more read before the end of the month. It is now the end of August. It's Friday, the 30th of August. I've read 5 more books this week, which is quite a lot, and I've had 1 DNF. So we are going to a wedding tomorrow, so I'm not going to get any more books finished this month. But everything I've read in the last week, apart from the DNF, I have really, really enjoyed. So first up is Lucky Day by Beth and Morrey. This is quite a recent release, and this is about this woman who one day when she goes into her job at the office, something sets her off and she just decides she's had enough. So she walks out and she spends the day basically doing what she wants to do and telling people what she really thinks. I found this pretty funny. I laughed out loud at several points during the book. We know in terms of what set her off that she's sort of seen some list that one of her colleagues has, and something about this list of names is what has sort of set this off for her, but we don't find out until sort of near the end of the book what that is about. It is, you know, for the most part, an enjoyable, light-hearted read, but there are definitely some darker aspects, so you may want to check out content warnings for this one. Next up is some historical fiction. This is The Company by J.M. Varese, and I really enjoyed this. So this is set in London in 1870, and it's about this family who own a wallpaper company. So they make this like luxury wallpaper. So they've it's a very successful company, and the father of the family has died. So the man who has been sort of at the helm of the company since then and has also sort of been looking out for the rest of the family, he then dies all of a sudden, and so then the family, so Lucy is the daughter of the family, and it's mostly sort of from her point of view. The family then have to sort of get to grips with the company, the workings of the company. There is a man called Julian Rivers who sort of introduces himself to them, and he works for the company, but they've never heard of him before, and he starts to sort of ingratiate himself into the family, and we're not really sure, and the family's not really sure what his sort of real intentions are. I thought this was intriguing, gothic. The cover matches our curtains. Let me see if I can reach this over. I don't know how much you can see, but look, I mean, look, you can't even tell I'm holding the book, it's exactly the same. Apart from our curtains are a little bit more blue-green, but look, there's birds, there's swirls, so that's a bit freaky that every time I look at our curtains I will think of this creepy book, but nevertheless, it was very, very enjoyable. Quite short for historical fiction, I think it's like 100 to 150 pages, but yeah, really, really enjoyable. Then I read The Damages by Genevieve Scott. This, it's a good job I enjoyed it because I asked my library to buy a copy of this. So I heard Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings compare this to I Have Some Questions For You by Rebecca Mackay, which is one of my favourite books that I read last year. And yeah, so I wanted to give this a go, and yeah, that is a really good comparison. I think if you like I Have Some Questions For You, you'll probably like this, and vice versa. So this is set in two timelines. We have a timeline in 1998. Our main character is called Roz, and she is studying at university in Ontario, and her roommate Megan goes missing. And so we sort of hear from Roz at the time, what led up to that. Roz's sort of different feelings of guilt around that and what happened to her roommate. And because it's set in the 90s as well, I thought it was really interesting to see the different, I guess largely the way that women and girls were treated and spoken about in a way that was thought to be fine, and clearly, you know, it never was, but yeah, I thought it was really interesting the way that was considered. And then we have a present day timeline as well, when Roz is older, she's got a child, and some stuff happens that sort of makes her reconsider what happened to Megan back in the 90s. Again, you might want to check out some content warnings on this one, but I found it quite a nuanced discussion, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Next is a strange little book. This is The Sleepwatcher by Rowan, Hisayo, Buchanan. This was a random library pick, and I enjoyed this, and it was quite unusual. So our main character is a 16-year-old girl called Kit, who lives in a rundown seaside town with her family, and she starts to suffer these episodes while she's asleep, whereby she sort of detaches from her body and is then able to move around the town. She can go through walls, she can go into her neighbours' homes, and she can watch what's going on. And so she doesn't really kind of understand why this is happening or where this has come from or what's happening, but this is what she's all of a sudden sort of able to do. And so this is sort of partly coming of age story, and then while she is having these strange sort of episodes at night, she discovers different things about people around her. Again, you might want to check out content warnings on this one, but yeah, I enjoyed it. It was quite a sort of unusual little book. It's not really about the weird episodes themselves in terms of like, why is this happening, how is this happening. It's just something that is happening to her, but it's really about what she sort of learns as a result of that, and then the impact that has. But yeah, that was a good little read. And then my DNF was Orbital by Samantha Harvey, or should I say Snorbital, as my lovely friend Charlie from Charlie Brooke Reads has coined it. I only made it to page 5 and I was really bored. So this is on the book along list, and I've already kind of decided I'm not in a booker reading mood at the moment anyway. But this holds, I'd already come in by the time I made that decision. And this was one of the books on the long list that I had been interested in reading anyway, even before it was long listed. So I thought I would give it a go. It's really short. It's like less than 150 pages. And it's about these astronauts who are looking at Earth from their spaceship, and I think it's pretty philosophical. The writing was over the top to me. So here's the thing, I don't really like really lyrical, like beautiful writing. Not to say I never appreciate that, but it's just not something that I look out for or sort of appreciate as much as some other people do. I can appreciate good writing, I can, but I think there's a point whereby, and maybe this is just what literary fiction is, whereby it's all about the writing and the point is the writing. And I mean, I'm sure that there's lots of philosophical discussions in here, which I potentially to a point may have found quite interesting, but when the writing is just so over the top in your face, it's just not to my taste, and I didn't get on with it. I mean, I only gave it 5 pages, but there we go. Then last night I finished a brilliant book, and that was How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I had so much fun with this book. It was a total page turner. It took me a little bit to get into, but then once I was into it, couldn't stop reading it, didn't want to put it down. I loved the horror in this book. I thought it was really creepy, and I just loved the places this book went. I thought this was so good. So this is my first Grady Hendrix that I've read. I have DNF'd the Final Girl Support Group, but that was a few years ago, and I think that DNF was just like, I wasn't really in the mood for it. It wasn't initially grabbing me. I would definitely give it another go. I haven't read this, and I have heard some people say this is their least favourite of his books, which is interesting, but I love this so much. So this is about, what's her name? I mean, I only just finished it. I have no idea what her name is. Louise. So her parents have died in an accident, and so her and her brother Mark have to sort of deal with their parents' home and all of their belongings, and deal with sort of the will and the inheritance and all that different stuff. So Louise's mum was a puppeteer, and had a lot of puppets, a lot of dolls within the house. And you might be able to guess where this is going to go, because creepy stuff happens with these dolls and these puppets. I do feel like I feel like probably a fair amount of people wouldn't be creeped out by the book. I'm not someone I don't have a phobia of dolls or anything, but I do think they can be really creepy. And the points where I was reading this, like I was reading it in bed the other night, and there was a scene that takes place in a bedroom and creepy stuff is happening, and I was actually creeped out. I was like, oh my God, what if a puppet reaches out from under the bed and grabs me? So I thought it was really creepy. I just had a great time with this, and as well as it being, for me, a really effective horror novel, I think it's kind of more than that as well. I guess all the best horror novels are more than that, really, and are doing something else. And yeah, by the end, I mean, I'm not going to say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but I found it really impactful. And I just had a great time with this, honestly, really loved it. So I think I want to read everything by Grady Hendrix. My libraries don't have much. So I know I can get the Final Girl Support Group. I think my work library has My Best Friend's Exorcism. And then I know there's a few more that I don't know where I can get from, but I'd need to read everything that he's written, I think, because I had such a great time with this book. It was excellent. So that's everything that I read in August. I've been off work today. I went to the library in Liverpool this morning. This is the library that I've only recently joined, and I picked up 6 books. I've already got several books from other libraries out at the moment. I've got 6 more books. I called into a second-hand bookshop and got 5 books, which I will show at some point in a book haul. Yeah, so I'm kind of out of control, but that's okay. That's okay. There's worse things to be addicted to than borrowing library books, I think. So that's okay. It makes me feel better. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and let me know what your favourite book that you read in August was. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.